So, hello everybody. I'm Paige Sharp with the Indiana Arts Commission. Welcome to your evening webinar with our favorite human on the planet, Elaine. She's the, well, I'll just say your whole name, I suppose, Elaine Grogan Luttrell. Although you almost need no introduction. You've been with us for a long time and we bring you back over and over because you are so great. For those of you who do not know, Elaine founded Minerva Financial Arts in 2009, and she works to build financial literacy in creative individuals and organizations through education and coaching. Her goal is to make all creative individuals both financially powered and creatively free. Yay. Well, Elaine, go ahead and kick it off, and I'm looking forward to learning with you tonight and everybody else.
Sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Paige, for the warm welcome. And thank you to the Indiana Arts Commission for hosting all of these wonderful conversations and all the great work you do for the creative Hoosier community. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can dive right in. Those of you that know me well know that I welcome and love questions and interruptions. I've got the chat window open, so I will keep an eye on that. You can also give me a wave. I can see most of your faces, or use emojis, or just unmute yourself and shout out something you'd like to clarify on or have some more information on. So tonight we're talking about systems, all sorts of different types of systems and habits to use those systems effectively. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you kind of what systems you use and what some challenges you might have in using those systems. So be thinking about that as I go through all of the intro information that we always share. As Paige said, I'm Elaine. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in Dublin, Ohio. So I'm your neighbor to the east, and I'm on Kashkashkia and Hopewell Indigenous and Cultural Lands that was ceded in 1795. Professionally, I am a certified public accountant, and I hold a PFS designation. That's the Personal Financial Specialist. And then I finished a program in financial therapy and became an accredited financial counselor a handful of years ago, which is all the human side of money. That is almost as important, if not more so, than all of the debits and the credits and the taxes and everything else. I have said this many, many times, but I am by far the luckiest money person ever because I get to hang out with people like you all the time. I work mostly with funders and organizations across the country to bring financial literacy and that creative empowerment to individuals through the things they learn about money. And of course, we love working with the governmental agencies who do so much good in the world, and then educational institutions as well, so that this can be content that people encounter at various points throughout their careers, while they're students, as they're emerging or youngish kind of artists, and then as they continue throughout their careers as well. We know that this is somewhere where you should feel comfortable both taking space so that your questions are heard and making space for others so they feel comfortable putting their questions forward as well. We are all equal parts teachers and learners, especially when it comes to systems and habits. You definitely know what you need, how you work best, and what sort of timing or frequency makes sense for devoting some time to kind of this administrative piece of your creative life. So definitely remember that and retain your own agency there. And of course, we do want to respect the confidentiality of the space. Although this is being recorded, definitely if someone shares a story, let's let that story stay here within this space, but take the lesson from the story and carry that with you. So, we're talking about systems and habits tonight. And more specifically, we wanted to kind of talk through kind of some major categories where a system might make sense to help you identify things you need to keep track of. We'll highlight some examples of common systems, talk through some pros and cons, and then the ending part will be all about sort of effective ways to incorporate those habits into your ongoing creative practice. But I'd love to start by hearing from you. What systems do you use? What things works for you? And what sort of challenges or barriers do you encounter? Maybe especially thinking back to tax time, which just ended. So were there pain points there that you want to kind of bring forward?
I had a problem filing my state taxes. And apparently there was some sort of, I made too much money on my income that was not paid with, that I did not pay the ongoing, I guess it's quarterly typically, but because this year was an exception, I first started my business. Now they're wanting me to go and make payments as we go along. There was some sort of snafu, and I know you're in Ohio. I don't know if you know anything about the Indiana tax that has essentially eliminated me from being able to file my Indiana state taxes. And so I'm actually still up in the air whether or not my federal got filed. I know I put all the information in, then it went forward to the Indiana state. This is going through the, not tax act, but TurboTax. So I don't think TurboTax and state of Indiana are playing fair with each other. And so I got caught in the middle somehow. And I believe that I saw on a banner that the time to file the Indiana state tax had been extended to May 17th. So that is my main question. I need to go through the filing of Indiana state tax and pay my dues, which hurts.
Yes, it does hurt. And also congratulations on the success that led to that pain, right? Because those are, the two sides there. I think, keep your eye on your email for that notification from TurboTax that your federal return was accepted. That'll be sort of what you need, because we're only countable moments after the big deadline. So they will need a little bit of time to process. I use TurboTax myself, and I got that sort of acceptance notice within about 4 days or so. So, keep an eye, it should be coming pretty soon. And then also, if you do need to dive back in and, work with TurboTax and or the state of Indiana to kind of navigate that, definitely keep that top of mind over the next couple of weeks so that you can get that in. But with respect to your estimated taxes going forward, do you happen to know if you need to make those payments at the federal level, the state level, or both?
I believe it's just at the state level.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure. I know the federal went fairly smooth. It seemed like it wanted to flag me, but it just kind of moved me on. I don't know.
Yeah,
totally
fair.
The Indiana side.
Yeah. Well, we know for federal purposes, if you end up owing more than $1,000 when you file, then that's usually the trigger to need to start making estimated payments at the federal level. And one thing you can do for this year, as you're thinking about 2022 going forward, is just take note of what your total Indiana state tax ends up being for 2021. And then you'll want to make sure you're paying in at least that much for 2022. That's usually a good way to avoid penalties and interest. The other way you can do it is to go through kind of the estimated calculation, where you basically guess your income, which might be similar to last year or might be wildly different, because that happens in the arts. Estimate your deductions, which again could be similar or wildly different, and then get that net income number, and then apply your Indiana state income tax rate to that. Plus, if you live somewhere that has a local income tax as well, a city, a county, sometimes a school district, we'd also want to apply that rate to it. Yeah, great questions. Okay. Great questions. Couple things in the chat I'd love to share as well. Jessica shares they've been using Wave software. I love Wave. I have so many clients that really, really love Wave. And I love that it's helping you keep track of your receipts. And you've struggled to get your act together in tracking things properly. But this year you're turning over a new leaf. I love that, Jessica. I think that's amazing. And I think starting with a system that works for you, whether it is Wave or a ledger or Excel like Trace is using, right? Starting with something that works for you is going to be your best bet. And then you also share, Jessica shares, a tricky thing is that some income comes from teaching classes with no sales tax, and then also from paintings or the sale of work, which is subject to sales tax, right? And that is super annoying. I would say within Wave, definitely see if you can break out the income categories, right? So you have one income category that I would call it teaching classes, right? And then a second one for sale of work. And then maybe you have additional categories as well. Maybe you also sell prints of your work, or maybe you have royalties because you published an art book 10 years ago, or maybe you have another category, maybe you call it like honorariums or something. And that's where you would put, those small tokens of appreciation that come in, for judging a contest or something you might do. But use Wave to break out those additional income categories so that when you are filing that sales tax return in Indiana, right, it's so much easier just to pull, okay, what were my sales during the past 3 months or 6 months, depending on your filing period, and then file it that way. Teresa shares that you're using spreadsheets. I love that. I think that is fantastic. And you're saving your business related receipts, which is great. And then a specific question, you're a public school teacher, which I love. And there's some gray area between what is school related and what is purely creative and business related, and how to best claim those expenses. Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. So because you are I think you said a public school teacher. Yep. So I'm assuming you're K-12. So as a thumbs up, I appreciate that. As a K-12 instructor, you get that special $250 adjustment to income, which is what we call it, which you can use for classroom supplies, right? This is one of those rare exceptions when someone who has a W-2 job, so they're paid as an employee, right? They're able to deduct expenses associated with that employment. Normally, that is not permitted, and it hasn't been since 2018. But for our public school teachers who put so much money into their jobs and maintaining effective learning environments for their students, there's this $250 deduction you can claim. So I would say anything that is classroom related, definitely put it towards that $250 deduction so you can maximize that. For the other things that feel more like they're related to your creative business, not necessarily, classroom decor or supplies for your students or something like that, then I would keep all those expenses separately, because they're not deductible on kind of your main tax return, but they are deductible on Schedule C of your tax return, as long as they are ordinary and necessary and effectively connected to your trade or business. And you're right, sometimes it's a little fuzzy kind of where that line is. So you can use your record keeping system, those spreadsheets, to make sure you're describing the business purpose of something that is classroom related for your life as a public school teacher. And then these other expenses that have a business purpose that's more closely tied to your work in your studio or as a musician or an instructor or whatever your sort of creative avenue is. Another question or comment in the chat, keep them coming. These are amazing. Jessica says, if you're negotiating on price, you'll sometimes say that you'll pay for the sales tax. So you have a hard time knowing how to track that income when you're covering tax. Oh my gosh, such good questions, Jessica. Sometimes sales tax just shakes out on its own, right? So what basically, if you are covering the sales tax for someone, right, what essentially is happening, and I'm going to use super basic, probably not 100% accurate math, right? But let's say you would sell something for $100, right? If you're charging sales tax, you would then collect $107, 7% of 100, right? In Wave, you would report $100 as the selling price, and then you would basically just hold that $7. Essentially, it's like an account payable that you're holding to the state, right? Because you're holding the money for the state of Indiana. And then when you pay it to the state of Indiana, then you've paid off, what you have collected on their behalf. If you're covering the sales tax for someone, so let's say it's $100 painting or something, and you're covering the sales tax, what's really happening is you're basically selling it for like $93. That's slightly inaccurate math, but run with me because my brain can't do accurate math when it comes to these percentages. But you're basically selling it for $93. And then that's the selling price you would record in Wave. And then you would essentially pay the $7, right? So that's kind of how the back end is happening. So when you go to report your sales tax, right, if you have covered somebody's sales tax, right, it's probably better to report the sale at $93 and then hold that $7. Or you could report the sale at $100 and then just pay out of pocket. But then you would want to kind of do that adjustment since you're not getting it from the client. So I would probably report it at 93 and then report the $7 you're basically holding. I hope that helps. Stick shares, you're struggling to learn how to apply sales tax from different states. Probably everything I said just further complicated that, right? Because, now we're sort of layering in, backing out sales tax and all of this other stuff. And Sticks, what I would say is what you want to pay attention to is where your work is going, and then what the laws in those different states say, which is super annoying. And I would say a general rule, this is not an absolute rule, but a general rule that came out of the Wayfair versus South Dakota Supreme Court ruling is that if you have less than $100,000 of sales in a particular state, or if you have fewer than 200 transactions in a particular state, odds are you're not subject to sales tax there. Now, I'm not talking about your tax home, right, which is Indiana. That is where you live and you do business. That is your primary tax home. For you, there's no dollar or sales threshold, right? You live in Indiana, your work is subject to sales tax, you are required to collect and remit it, right? So no thresholds for your tax home. But for anywhere else that is not your tax home, if you are not going there, if you are just simply shipping work there, or maybe you're engaged in digital work that is subject to sales tax somewhere else, then we think about that $100,000 sales limit or that $200 or 200 transaction limit. Those are good kind of guidelines. And that 200 transactions could be pretty easy to meet. If you, Sticks, I don't know your creative discipline, but if you're a musician, for example, digital downloads of music are subject to sales tax in Ohio. So if you have a huge following and a bunch of people are downloading your music, not through Spotify, but like through your website in Ohio, you could pretty quickly hit that 200 transaction threshold, which, sometimes people don't even realize until, they get a letter from whatever state that says, hey, you haven't been in compliance. So yeah, sales tax from different states, super, super complicated. Here's the general rule though. Tax home, know the laws really well, pay close attention. Anywhere where your work is going, but you are not going, think about those general guidelines, $100,000 of sales or 200 transactions. And if you notice you have a lot of activity in a state, go ahead and double check that state's sort of rules to see if they follow those general rules or if they have their own special rules that you might want to know about. And then the third thing just to kind of pay attention to is if you are physically going somewhere else, it's a good idea to see if you being there for a certain number of days is going to trigger a sales tax obligation. Often this comes up if you're participating in a festival or something like that. And usually the festival organizers can help facilitate sales tax payments. I've even seen some festivals just handle it all, especially if they attract a lot of out-of-state sellers, or they'll give you a quick info sheet to help you stay in compliance. But yeah, sales tax is a bear. It is really, really complicated. And I would say struggle as long as you need or want to, because, most people that deal with sales tax struggle with it tremendously. Ooh, Jessica has a question about tracking mileage. I love that. That was what I was thinking people would bring up as the pain point that they experienced this year for taxes. That is often one for me. I swear I'm going to be really good at tracking mileage all the time, but often I fall behind. So I find myself going back to my calendar to make sure I'm capturing all of those trips I may have taken. There were fewer of them in the pandemic, as we know, but especially as things are opening up, and especially as you look at kind of your calendar and maybe even your bank statements to see, oh my gosh, I went to this art supply store on this day. I know I drove there and back, so let me make sure to capture those miles, right? Finding a system that might be a little bit better is something we can definitely chat about. Teresa says, wondering for pure contributions. I love that you use the word contribution there. So Venmo, Patreon, et cetera, if they need to be claimed for tax purposes, yes, absolutely. I would say for Patreon, that's pretty clear because that is clearly associated with you as a creator. If it is a Venmo payment and it's like a gift from a friend, right? So for your birthday, you know, instead of getting you a gift, they're like, here's $100. This is just to support your studio, right? I would probably call that a gift, right? As opposed to earned income. But I think as a good general rule, if they are sort of ongoing contributions like Patreon that happen to come through Venmo, yeah, that is taxable income to you. Congratulations. Oh, and sticks, I'm glad that alleviated some stress. I think my blood pressure went up as I was talking about sales tax. So I'm glad some of that went down. Amy has a question, is Indiana use tax due on those out-of-state sales? No. So if you purchase something out of state, right, then you are supposed to pay use tax in Indiana. But if you are selling things out of state, the recipient, assuming you do not collect sales tax because you don't meet those thresholds or anything else, that recipient is supposed to report their own use tax in their own state, but you do not have to worry about it if you are selling to another state. No use tax in that situation. Great question, Amy. But question about someone who uses Quicken and then TurboTax. You have a Schedule C, you have various revenue streams from education, project director, art sales, and studio rental. You're a co-op gallery member and you file, a K1 with income there, right? Got it. So there's a partnership structure and you get a K1. Love it. And then you also have a W-2 from IU, where you work. And then it gets complicated. I love that. So they disallow most of Schedule C. Oh, that's really interesting. And you've been fearful to challenge them, feeling that if you went down that path, they would target you. Paranoid, maybe, but you know, I don't think that's unreasonably paranoid. That's really, really interesting. There are a couple things that could be going on, and it sounds like a state of Indiana audit issue as opposed to a federal issue. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But what I think I'm understanding, or what could be happening, is they might, I hate to use the word suspicious, but they might not understand that the K1 work, right, the co-op work, has expenses that are totally separate from you, the artist work, which would be ordinary and necessary and deductible on Schedule C. And then you also have your IU job, right, where we don't have any deductions that are allowed there. So it might be worth, you know, I don't know, they said they disallowed most of your Schedule C 2 years in a row. If you have an opportunity to converse with them again, so you get one of those letters that says they have just disallowed everything, it might be worthwhile to have a conversation just so that you can help them understand that for your IU work, there are no deductions. For your Schedule C work, which is separate and distinct from your co-op work, right? Here are those deductions. And then for the co-op, it has its own expenses that run through the partnership. So it's probably just a little bit of confusion around kind of all these different streams. The other thing that could be happening, depending on what the deductions are, if they're deductions for, let's say, your cell phone, for example, I'm just going to take this particular example, right? The cell phone is something called a listed asset, right? So it's something that you have to use at least 50% for your business before you take any deductions on it, right? So if they are looking at that type of deduction, they might say, with all these different streams of income, there's no way that you would meet that 50% threshold only on your Schedule C. So it could be some of those nuances that you're getting a little pushback on. So, you know, if you have an opportunity to have a conversation with them and you want to, it might be worthwhile. If you also want to say, forget it, I would rather sleep well tonight, that's probably okay too. And that is your choice to make. A question from Kevin. Hi, Kevin. How do you pay sales tax if you live in Indiana and have an art fair booth sale in Kentucky? Do I pay Indiana or do I pay Kentucky? So if you are physically in Kentucky for enough days that you get nexus in Kentucky, meaning you exist there for tax purposes, you collect Kentucky sales tax on the sales you make in Kentucky at the art fair and then remit them to the state of Kentucky. And then in Indiana, you would not report those sales for sales tax purposes. You're still going to report all that income for income tax purposes. But when you file your sales tax return in Indiana, it'll say what were your Indiana sales, and then you would exclude any of those Kentucky sales. And I would just say check with the organizers of the art fair just to see kind of what the sales tax compliance situation is, because they may have guidance for you that says, you know what, if you're in Kentucky for fewer than 7 days, you are not subject to sales tax, which would be lovely. There are a number of states that have those short-term sellers exemptions on them. They also might have kind of a blanket sales tax filing process that you can participate in that hopefully might make it a little bit easier. But yeah, check in with them. So hope that helps. And then, oh, Janine, you shared that you love paper-based systems. I love a good paper-based system too. I don't know if you can see this, but I have been taking notes as we're going through this because I really appreciate a tactile experience. You have a folder for freelance expenses, beautiful, a separate checking account. Excellent. I love that. And then, oh, and you set aside and take professional association and publication fees from, perfect. And you have 3 blue zippered pouches that contain pads on which you keep track of book sales for the 3 books that you have. Oh my gosh, you even have it separated by publication, which I love. You have a monthly statement from royalties from your self-published books, and then an Excel sheet where you track earnings. You say repository only. I'd love to know more what you mean by repository only there, but I love it. And then you put together everything on oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't actually do any calculations on Excel. I do my calculations by hand because I forgot how to use Excel.
It is wildly annoying, right, to do that. If you want, feel free to ignore this part, but the formula you want is =, sum, SUM for summation, and then open your parentheses and then select all the numbers you want to add up and then close your parentheses. So you're in Excel language, equals is how you tell Excel you're about to give it a command. In this case, sum is the command, which means Excel, add up these numbers I'm about to give you, and then you put those numbers within those parentheses so Excel knows what to look at to execute the command. And then you hit enter, and then you're good. And you can always double check it.
Repeat that one more time. Equal sign sum, open parentheses, put in your calculation, end parentheses, then what?
That's it. Enter. Yeah, or return, depending on which kind of laptop you have.
Okay.
That's it. And then in the within the parentheses, you can type in the numbers, but it's faster if you just kind of select the cells where those numbers are. And then that way, if you have a new Excel workbook for the next year, you can just kind of replace that data and then make sure the formula is still looking at all the right numbers, but then it'll just update with the new information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next year, you might also be really fancy and we'll do sum if, and then we'll sort everything by categories for you. But we'll master sum first. And then you've got everything on the legal pad, Amazon orders, other stuff. Yep. Oh, and then you donate money. So you have that under the standard charitable deduction. And then you've got a W-2 and 1099. Yeah, I love it. It is getting harder, right? There's a lot going on there and a lot to do. Since you are building skills in Excel, I think if you did want to migrate maybe a little bit more into Excel, maybe you have one kind of tab in the workbook for your income and maybe a second one for expenses. That could be something you might want to think about just to speed up the process a little bit more at tax time. But, I think, sometimes it's just, there is an amount of work that just simply has to go into this. And I like what you're describing as your system. I am sorry you got sort of kicked out of electronic filing. That's super annoying. So I'm glad you printed everything and sent it in. And you're employing a professional this summer so that this can go off your plate. So I like that as a strategy for you too. Then a question from Amy: as a sole proprietor, is there a benefit to paying yourself a salary versus just using the income as needed? Nope, there is not. I'm very sorry. If you were an S corporation, there would be a benefit to that. But those are relatively large and complex and expensive to form. So we usually wait until your income is in the $130,000-ish range before we think about S corporations. If you are a sole proprietor or a single member LLC, you just take money out as needed, and we call them member draws or owner draws. And then they cannot legally be called a salary, but you can take money as needed. But when you hit that, lots of zero threshold, then you can start to pay yourself a salary, withhold those taxes, and there are some interesting geographical things we can do tax-wise. So many good questions. I love it. I love it. I love it. I also very much appreciate sort of the volunteering of some of those pain points, especially around sales tax, which is unnecessarily complicated, mileage, which always comes up, and then also just having things in different places. So, tracking it on a sheet of paper or in an Excel workbook and having the receipts and sort of thinking about ways to kind of pull things together. So I love too that we're focused on kind of the money piece, but I also want to make sure we're thinking about other records that might help us make sense of things as well. So we've already talked about a lot of the money records to keep. Definitely you want to keep your income, and definitely you want to make sure if you are selling work that's subject to sales tax, that's kind of in its own income category. We talked about doing that in Wave, but if you're using Excel to track your income, you can add a column and just note that if it is a sale, or maybe it's an honorarium, or teaching income or something like that, you can kind of sort it into those different categories using Excel or Google Sheets. We definitely want to save expenses. I also love saving receipts. If you're retaining all of the information needed, you don't always have to save the receipt, but I always err on saving more rather than less. And then mileage. Personally, I use an Excel document to track my mileage. I have the date of the trip, the number of miles, and the business purpose of the trip. So, for example, driving from my home to the airport to catch a flight to go to a workshop I was leading or something, right? That would be the date, the certain number of miles, and then that would be sort of my description. So I keep that just sort of as a running log for the year. And then I use that sum formula that we were just talking about to add up all of those miles. And then I multiply it by the standard IRS rate, which changes each year. Going forward in 2022, it's 58.5 cents per business mile driven. And then I have another formula where I say equals, and then I click on the cell that has my total number of miles, and then I hit Shift 8 on the keyboard. That's the asterisk symbol, also means multiplied. And then I click the cell where I have 0.585, which is the IRS rate, and that'll give me the tax deduction for my mileage. So personally, that's how I do it. There's also an app called Mile IQ that people really love. It's on your phone and it'll track your miles that way. If you use QuickBooks, they also have a mileage tracking app that you can empower on your phone. I just don't remember enough to use the app. So that's why I go back to good old trusty Excel. There are also beautiful, adorable little notebooks you can have and keep in your car and track your mileage that way as well. And so with all of this money stuff, oh, and Chris, yeah, thanks for calling out Mile IQ. Chris Acton always has the best tips. So pay attention to anything Chris says. When it comes to this money stuff, obviously we're keeping all of this for tax purposes, right? But there are also sort of proactive, empowered things we can think about to pay attention to these strategic insights we might have as well. Another category that sort of kept coming up as I was thinking about things that make sense to save. I called this category history, and there's probably a better name for it, but these would be like things you've applied for or submissions you've made if you're a writer, perhaps, any awards you've won, programs you've participated in, shows you've done, right? Kind of your, it's almost like a CV, but less well formatted, or like a resume and less well formatted, right? It's just kind of like a list. And partially, this also supports this tax reporting thing, because if there are ever questions about you being considered a hobbyist instead of a professional artist, which we hate in tax world, having this history that shows you are attempting to make money, engaging in this activity in a professional manner, right? That always really supports your argument that you are not a hobbyist. But it's also helpful to, think about, what do you have open? What's going on? Are you eligible for this grant if you have already applied for it, right? The more things you have going on, the harder it is to remember and keep track of all those things. And if there's something that's kind of lingering or out there, and you maybe want some feedback about, maybe why you didn't get into this particular show or something, there can be a moment to go back after the mourning period has ended, right, to ask for that feedback. I also really like tracking time. I think the moments in your career where you are very diligently tracking time are probably when you are very, very busy or have a lot going on, and it's really crucial that you know how long something is taking. Or if you're doing something brand new, right? So let's say, you've gotten pretty good at being a studio artist and making work and maybe leading workshops, but you've been now asked to take on this other type of role, and maybe you're not really sure how long this is going to take you, right? That's a good time to pay really close attention to your time. And we want to make sure we have a sense of how long things really do take, so that we are charging enough for what we're doing, right? And then also so that we are, seeking balance. I talk about portfolio careers a lot, and it's easy for some unrelated work to kind of grow because it feels really secure, and then take over the time that you would otherwise spend creating. So if you're feeling a little unbalanced, that's a really good time to carefully track your time and see if all of these unrelated things are worth it, time, money, and fulfillment wise. And then I have sort of the almost outward facing or marketing types of systems to pay attention to. Certainly thinking about tracking your contacts in some sort of way probably makes sense. Absolutely, this is customers, and this is probably tied into the marketing work you might do. Maybe you have an email newsletter. Maybe you do most of your marketing through social media, and you have a sense of, who your followers are, right? But we kind of want to have information about our customers, certainly to manage communications, to make sure they know when they can seek commissions or, come to a show or whatever else we might be doing. But I also like the idea of including partners here. Now, these could be sort of business partners or your peer artists or your fellow co-op members, certainly. But this could also be sort of a less literal version of the word partner. Maybe it's a funder that you have worked with a lot, or maybe it is a gallerist that you see as a mentor, right? These could be individuals who sort of serve you in a professional capacity, and you might want to make sure to proactively communicate with them, maybe not as often as you communicate with your customers, but maybe once a year with, thank yous or, updates about what's going on. So just thinking about, are there human contact information pieces that it makes sense to track in some sort of system? And then certainly your inventory, you want to make sure to be paying attention to. So if you are a visual artist, we want a very careful inventory of the works you make, the size, the materials, all of that good stuff. If you are someone who sells merchandise, maybe you're a musician and you sell, CDs or LPs that you've pressed, or you have t-shirts or hats, we want to have a sense of kind of what that inventory is, so that you can reorder when you're getting low, but also just so also for tax purposes, how much did you sell during the year? Does it make sense, right? Are the numbers all there? Or if you're a literary artist and you have books that you're selling as part of your inventory, do you have all of those, and are you tracking all of that? And I know someone mentioned Patreon earlier. It's not technically inventory, but if you're, making postcards or stickers or sending tokens of appreciation to people on Patreon, it's a good idea to kind of keep a sense of how much you have there and when you might need to reorder and, all those kind of things, just to kind of keep a sense of, well, essentially your assets, the things you have that you sell or you share with those who support you. And then I touched on marketing too. So here's my dream, right? We've got all these different systems. My dream is that they all kind of talk to each other, right? So that you're spending less time maybe updating everything and more time making work, right? So let's say you apply to participate in a show and then you're accepted. Hooray, you're very excited, right? Maybe at that point, we make sure to add the host of the show or other peer artists to this customer/partners list of contacts, right? So that you're keeping track of them and you're, knowing who to send the holiday greeting to the next year or something like that. And then maybe we make sure we go to our inventory system and set aside the pieces that are going to be in that particular show so that you know where they are and, they're easily accessible. And maybe in your inventory system, you note that these pieces were shown in this very prestigious juried show in fill in the blank, right? And then also maybe, depending on the insurance policies of this show, maybe we make sure your own insurance is up to date and it's going to cover the shipment of the work to wherever it's going to go as well. And then, maybe we plan out the marketing as well. We know there's going to be this show, we draft up the communications and we get it kind of ready to go. I'd love for all of those things to kind of talk to each other. And then there's a money part that comes up in a lot of these places too, right? So there's probably an application fee for the show or a reading fee or a submission fee, something like that. With respect to your inventory, you have that insurance cost, you're going to have shipping costs, you might have travel costs for yourself. And this is also a really good time within your inventory system to gut check the price of the piece, right? Maybe you're working with the host of the show to set it, or maybe you're solely in charge of deciding what you want to charge, but giving yourself some time to kind of check in with your system and see what an appropriate price might be is good. And then for the marketing, you might be subscribing to that email software provider. And you might also have sales tax you are collecting if there are sales of the work as part of the show, right? So there are sort of financial systems implications that come up in all of these places. And then, of course, all of this takes time. I didn't have anything creative to put under these categories. It's just all administrative time, right? That is just sucking up a whole lot of time as these things go on. Which sort of brings me to, which one of these things works best? There's a question in the chat. Is there any free software for tracking InKind? And I would say within Wave, which does have a free option, you can set up a category that you call InKind, and then you can manually add it or track it. Or within Google Sheets or Excel, you can track InKind within there. I don't know that I've seen a dedicated system only available to InKind, but if someone has an idea or has used something, definitely throw it in the chat. And InKind is when you might be donating something or receiving something, but not necessarily paying for it, right? That's what we mean by an InKind contribution or InKind income. So here, the IRS says you can use any system suited to your needs. That shows your income and expenses. So I have some examples here, but this doesn't have to stop here. Someone mentioned earlier that they have a separate bank account for their business, which I love. That is a best practice I advocate for. You certainly do not have to, especially as a sole proprietor, but it does make some of the record keeping easier. And part of it is because almost all financial institutions now have updated their systems so that they have charts and graphs and, interesting things you can look at and analyze. And they have one of those blank notes field. So let's pretend you make a deposit of, $107 for books that you sold, right? You could then in that notes field say, sales of books at this particular conference. And then you could even put, I sold 6 to 6 different people or something like that, right? So you can add a lot of detail within your bank system in a way that can make it really effective for you. But you don't necessarily have a whole lot of control, certainly not as much control as you have if you're using a database system like Excel or Numbers or Google Sheets. Pick your favorite version of those because they all basically work the same way, right? So if we're thinking about a money system, this is how I would set it up in Excel or Google Sheets. You would have the date of the transaction, the vendor or the client. So who did you pay or who paid you, the amount, and then the category. I would match this to your tax form, right? So the categories you probably use on your tax form are maybe advertising, maybe car and truck expenses or automobile expenses for like parking or tolls or things like that. You probably might have contract labor if you are a musician and you are the head of the band and you get paid and then you pay out other people. That's probably a contract labor category for you. You probably have supplies and materials, maybe travel, lodging, airfare, subscriptions, right? As you look at your tax form for this most recent year, specifically Schedule C, look at the categories that you've used and use those same ones going forward. And then I would add that business purpose because this is where we describe how something is ordinary, necessary, and effectively connected to the trade or business. You can export data from any financial system, right? Cash App, Venmo, Stripe, PayPal, your bank, your credit card, you name it. You can export the data and then just kind of drop it into Excel and then do some formatting and sorting, or you can manually enter it if that's more comfortable for you, or you kind of enjoy the process of going through some of that information. But that's probably how I would set this up. And then I would add some extra information, right? So maybe you add another tab in your Excel workbook or your Google Sheet that has the client data or the customer data that you're tracking, right? And maybe you just start with, okay, who did I sell to this past month? I'm going to add their contact information here. And for display purposes, this only shows a little bit of the contact information you might have. But in addition to all of this, you might note their pronouns. You might have a mailing address where you can physically mail something to them. You might keep track of what they bought, when and why, or anything else that might be useful information. And then I would also think about connecting it to some sort of inventory system. There are great inventory systems. I have a couple of examples of software systems if you want to track them later. But if you're not there or you haven't really found one that works, if you want to create an Excel inventory tracking system, it is not fancy, but it will get the job done. You basically want to number your pieces, share the title, date created, size, materials, depending on your medium. This could be easier or harder, or there might be additional things to include. I know, I think Amy shared their potter, so maybe you have an extra column that distinguishes, the type of pottery you might be doing or something like that, right? So you can kind of tailor this to the information you really need. I like having a location of the inventory, right? Is it in your studio? Is it on loan somewhere? Is it in a show? Has it been sold, right? Where is the piece? That's also good for insurance purposes. And then I really, really like having an image of the work. If you're using a system like Artwork Archive, for example, you will be able to add images of your work. If you're using Google Sheets, you're probably uploading an image to Google Drive, and maybe you're linking to it here so that everything is sort of contained. I have some notes information. Has it won anything? Why is it special? Was it written about? Was there any press, right? All of that is good kind of value boosting information. And then you've got the price, the date it sold, if it sold, and the purchaser, right? So we're connecting this to the sale, right? And then also to the client. So you can see how these systems, even tabs within Excel, can start kind of talking to each other. And then if Excel or Google Sheets or Numbers makes your eyes cross, there are lots of other software systems, some free or with a free option, some all paid. But QuickBooks is the classic. We've heard an endorsement for Wave and also Mile IQ. If you're tracking your time, Harvest and Toggle are two really good options. I mentioned Artwork Archive as being sort of the go-to for inventory tracking. Gist by Karen Atkinson is another software platform that people really like. It's sort of rooted in Excel, but in particular, the inventory tracking system she has is pretty good, and people tend to like it. And then when it comes to tracking your customers, your partners, your clients, or doing any of that marketing, Monday and Zoho are both really great client relationship management systems, but also Constant Contact or MailChimp will allow you to track all of your data within their systems as well. Question in the chat: of the banks and credit unions in the state, which ones give artists, creative entrepreneurs the best opportunities? I would love for anyone to weigh in if you have a particularly good experience. I would say I have had good luck with credit unions, particularly those who support the arts. So you might just sort of look around and see what financial institutions in your community are sponsoring, the dance companies, the art museum, the exhibitions, right? Look for kind of sponsorships of those nonprofit kind of groups, because often that is a financial institution at the local level that is supporting the arts in your community. Doesn't mean they will give you a great opportunity, but it does mean that their spending might align with your values in some ways, and that feels kind of good. But often it also just depends on the person, right? It could be someone who works for any financial institution, but if you go in and you say you're an artist and they're like, oh my gosh, I love art, right? Then that's how those relationships develop. And by the way, I would put that person on your email list or anything else with their consent. Of course, we don't spam people, but I would say, oh my gosh, I love that you love the arts. Can I put you on my list so that you know of upcoming opportunities and stuff like that, right? So we want to kind of just be watching for cultivating those community engagement opportunities wherever we see them. As you're thinking about pros and cons, I am cognizant of the time. So I think I'm going to skip the pros and cons section because we have talked about some of those pros and cons. This would also be a good time for me to remind you that you get a copy of this slide deck. So watch for Connie's email with the recording because the copy of the slide deck will be in there. So you can ponder those pro and con reflection questions at your leisure. And I definitely want to end with some thoughts around these habits. It can be tempting, I think, to say, well, if only I have the perfect system, then I would be a different person and all my records would be flawless, right? But I think we have to sort of remember and contextualize that we are still who we are, right? So we definitely want to make sure that there's a human element and a reality that you're acknowledging as part of this. So the first thing I'd encourage you to think about is the frequency for all of these different pieces. You do not have to update, your inventory on a daily basis. That is insane, right? In fact, I don't have anything on here daily. And I even struggle to say that your time should be weekly, right? Maybe monthly is fine. If you're a journaler, I journal weekly, right? But, you do you, figure out what works best. But the rhythm of your practice will often dictate how often you need to check in with these systems. And we definitely don't want it to be too often because you have more important things to do. So be realistic with yourself about how often your customers do want to hear from you, right? And find that frequency that works. And then we got to know how long it really takes. And this is where you paying attention and getting curious can be really, really helpful because sometimes it feels like these things take, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours, but let's really kind of pay attention and get a sense of what tasks really need to be done and how long do they really take, right? Because we want some sort of context around that number. And the number might change, and that's okay, but we want to have a pretty good sense of it, right? Because then we make a commitment to ourselves about when it's going to happen, right? And the when should be at a time that is very different from when you do your best creative work, right? I want any of this systems admin stuff to happen at the opposite time of when you do your best creative work. So if you need to find 2 hours, when is a good time for you to do admin work? Morning, afternoon, evening, night, right? You get to decide. And when you get the slide deck, I would suggest you circle one of these things. That sounds like silly homework, but I would still suggest it. And then choose, is it on a weekday or is it on a weekend, right? Depending on your lifestyle and the other humans and furry creatures in your life and the other commitments you have, right? Everyone's sort of pattern for this is going to look a little different. So choose the time of day, choose the day, and then put it on your calendar. I mean, literally do that. Put it on your calendar, whether you use a digital calendar or a physical paper one, block off that time and make the commitment. And then decide how you are best motivated. Personally, I am highly motivated by rewards. So if I have a task I do not want to do, I will pair it with a treat. Lately, it has been dark chocolate caramel squares with sea salt and a chai latte, right? So there is a reward that goes along with a task that I might not be super excited of, right? I'm also highly motivated by checking things off a to-do list, right? So that could be a motivator as well. Some people are more motivated by peer accountability. We have a lot of folks on this call. You have wonderful humans that surround you in your creative practice. You can get together with them to do a task, maybe especially if you're both using Excel and one person is really good at it, right? That can be part troubleshooting and part peer support all at the same time. Or maybe you don't need to physically do it together, but you have an accountability buddy and you text each other to make sure you're doing something. I had a writer I worked with years ago who did that with a small group of friends. They all happened to be cancer survivors, and they texted each other every time they went to the gym. And he said it sounded so self-indulgent, except it was this really cool accountability thing that they were all doing together, right? So know how you are best motivated. if you are motivated by not rewards, but sort of, you know, fear of what might happen if you don't do this, you can do some journaling. Now is a good time to do this, to think about all those pain points from tax time this year or anything else, to make sure that you are clear on your why, so that next year can be less painful. So keep all of those things in mind as you are going through and forming these new habits and diving into these new systems. I appreciate so much all of your time, all of your questions, all of the pets I got to see. I see something in Styx's lap. I saw Christine's cat. Warms my heart. So thank you for bringing all of the friends here tonight. I think we are at time. So if you have other commitments, thank you so much for being here. Also, I'm happy to follow up or stick around if there are more questions as well. So Paige, back to you.
Thank you, Elaine. That was such a pleasure. So much wonderful information. And I think my favorite part was you reduced significant stress of an artist, which is wonderful. That's like money well spent right there, you know, because this stuff is really a lot. And to have it demystified is just such a gift. So thank you so much. And y'all, if you have questions, check them in the box real fast. And you know, she's willing to stay over. You want to take full advantage of that opportunity. While you're mulling that over, I want to also let you know that our friends at the Indiana Small Business Development Center reached out to us and said, hey, we want to really support creatives in the state of Indiana. How can we partner with you? Can you do some trainings and stuff? And I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. So be on the lookout for training opportunities. And if you think of something that you're super interested, I really want to learn about intellectual property or contracts or something like that. I'm trying to use Elaine's awesome voice. Email me, let me know what you want, and I will share that forward with our regional arts partners who are going to be offering some of those in-person trainings around the state. So I think any questions in there, just I think a lot of profuse thank yous, and I join them. Thank you all. Thank you, Elaine. Always a pleasure. You are just such a gift. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. I'll see you again next time.